Welcome, everybody. I'm Andrew Peterson. I'm one of the founders of Closed, and we're hosting the Win-Loss Week event. And this session is one that I've been looking forward to the most. We have Cian McLaughlin here. He is the founder of Trinity Perspectives, which is based in Sydney, Australia. He's also a best-selling author. He's a renowned sales coach. He's a top 50 LinkedIn sales voice, and he has decades of experience running win-loss programs and practicing win-loss analysis. So we're really fortunate to have him here. So just without further ado, I want to turn the time over to Cian so he can present his session on lessons learned from 10 years worth of win-loss reviews. Thanks for joining us, Cian. We're excited.
Well, thank you for having me, Andrew. It's great to be here, and yeah, hopefully I can share a couple of nuggets that will resonate with your audience and really just kind of take the conversation about win-loss a little bit further forwards, because it's something I'm passionate about. So let me just quickly share my screen with you here, and we can kind of get going. You just let me know if you can see my deck.
Yep, that's looking great.
Excellent. So thank you for that introduction. I'm not going to spend too much longer talking about myself, but what I will share quickly, just for context, is that I came from the sales world, worked for a number of different technology companies over about a decade, carried a quota, managed teams, and did all that sort of stuff. And in that time, something kind of kept grating up against me. And this was the kind of the genesis or the catalyst for me to eventually step out and set up a business to talk about win-loss reviews and to work with organizations, to focus on win-loss reviews. So what I want to do in the next 20 minutes or so is just kind of dig into some of the lessons learned over the last decade through predominantly a sales lens, because that's kind of the world I come from. But, as you know, Andrew, win-loss ripples all the way through an organization. So it doesn't just touch sales, it touches pre-sales, it touches marketing, it touches, the product marketing team, it touches legals, it touches finance. It has an amazing capacity to have a positive impact in lots of different areas of the business, contingent on the questions that we ask to the customers and the responses that they provide. So my default setting in my sales career was probably this. It was kind of fingers crossed, send in a proposal, respond to a tender, throw a bid over the fence, and then hope that we got lucky, or hope that we'd done a good job and then we were successful. And invariably what would happen would be we would get a decision, and I'd be sort of looking around saying, well, how did that happen? And what influenced that decision? And be just very confused. Even if we won, we were, unsure as to why we'd won. And certainly when we lost, we were very unsure as to why we lost. So we did what an awful lot of companies around the world do. We sat around in a room as a sales team, and we came up with a narrative of what we thought might have happened on that deal. So I think we lost on price, and I think they were always leaning towards Oracle. And I think we didn't get, good executive coverage at a senior level in the organization. And then we agreed amongst ourselves that, yeah, that's probably what happened. And we stuck that into CRM and we moved on to the next opportunity. But that just struck me as really odd and really strange, because, we might have spent 6 months on a pursuit. We might have spent tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on bids and demos and flying people in and all sorts of different things. And our return on investment was nothing. In fact, it was less than nothing, because we didn't even understand what had happened. And so I just thought that was odd. And so, a little over 10 years ago, I had what I thought was a bright idea at the time, which was, I wonder how we can fix this. It can't be as simple as just reaching out to our customers to kind of have a conversation and debrief with them on why we won or why we lost. But to sort of scratch the itch, I decided, well, I'll explore that option. And so I started reaching out to some customers while I was still employed in the corporate world and saying, hey, any chance I could come in and spend an hour with you and really just kind of walk through the buying process you went through and try and understand what we did well and where we have some room for improvement. And a couple of things struck me very quickly. First was their willingness to participate in those kind of conversations. Secondly was just how candid and honest they would be. But the third thing that struck me was quite often how far apart we were in our understanding from what they actually told us. And that was kind of the genesis of win-loss in my life, in terms of saying, this is unbelievable. We're leaving vast amounts of incredibly valuable information and data sitting there behind when we walk away from a sales cycle. And my realization was that if we've done a good job as professionals, then we've actually earned the right to that feedback. And our cost of sale and all of our effort is what we spend at the front end. But what are we getting out of the back end? And what we should be getting at the very least is some, specific feedback from our customers about what we did well, where we have some room for improvement. So I just want to dig in very, very quickly to the, I suppose the detail that underpins what's happening, what the problem is. So for so many B2B sales organizations around the world, they just don't know why they're winning and losing. Yes, they have an idea, but they don't necessarily understand that in detail. So there's gaps and there's breakages all over the sales function inside those organizations. And it's costing, as you know, Andrew, it's costing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on an annual basis, all of these pursuits, all of these bids, all of these pitches that often don't result in anything at all. And then if you dig into that, that's at a high level, that's the helicopter view. We're losing deals. We just don't understand why. I've played sport, for most of my life. And one of the things that professional athletes do is they watch the game tape back. They decide, okay, let me break it down into its component parts, understand what I did well, looking for micro improvements. And they also look at their competition and determine, how do I beat that individual? How do I improve? We call ourselves sales professionals. We call ourselves business professionals. I believe we have to earn the professional part of that title. And to do that, these are the type of things we need to be executing on a daily basis. There's an awful lot of organizations that are chasing deals, but they really should be qualifying out. But they don't have a very strong bid no bid process or go no go process because they haven't reverse engineered why they're winning and losing. And that leads to also a very inconsistent sales process, which means it's quite hard to work out, what's working for us and how do we make that repeatable across the organization. If we can't determine what we're doing well and what we're doing badly, then we don't know how to close the gap. And so at the top of the call, Andrew, you said, I do sales training and advisory work for companies around the world. One of the things that is a little bit unique is if we go and talk to your customers and they tell us where the gaps are, it makes it much, much easier to then say, okay, that's where you need to focus your cannons. You've got a massive issue with negotiation, or you've got a problem with your presentations, or the way you structure your bids are, suboptimal. Then you can focus on an area that is going to improve. Otherwise, what you're doing is just throwing money and time and energy and hoping that you hit the right problem. So these are some of the underlying issues. A lot of companies don't have much quantitative or qualitative data on their customer preferences. What they might be doing is a customer satisfaction survey or an NPS score, but that doesn't really give you much detail. All it gives you is a sort of a high level sentiment. If we dig in a little bit further, what we see is that a lot of organizations, they don't necessarily have the capacity or the desire to allocate a person full-time and say, hey, this is your job, you should be doing this. They don't necessarily have the tools or the resources to do these win-loss reviews either. And so, there's a whole lot of manual, unstructured process. So these are some of the sort of the underlying issues that we see. So what I wanted to do now is I just want to dig into some of the things that I've learned over a decade of talking to all of these customers around the world and, with my team and what surprised me and what I found interesting. So let's look at it from the lens of why do we lose big customers? And these are some of the consistent themes we hear. And if you wanted to ask the question, what constitutes a big customer? Obviously, that's going to be completely different from organization to organization. But for me, big customer are, those kind of 3 to 5 deals in a given year that are make or break for your organization. If they land, everyone's a hero and, we have an incredible year. If we lose them, we're in trouble. So these are the sort of the deals. So what are some of the things that we hear from customers? Well, we hear them saying your marketing content is generic, it's bland, it doesn't excite us, it's very sort of vanilla and stale. They talk about a lack of professionalism or some of the interactions actually being unethical. Now, in 2021, it's really disappointing to hear that sales execution is seen as unprofessional. But I'm sure you do, Andrew. We hear this on a daily basis. There's so many examples of either a lack of professionalism or, in fact, an ethical issue there as well. If we don't create an emotional connection with customers we interact with, what happens is it doesn't mean we necessarily lose the deal straight away, but in the event that one of the other vendors has created more rapport, empathy, connection, it puts us, certainly on the back foot. If you're seen as risky or cheap or niche, certainly for a mid-market or above customer, there's a good chance you're going to lose that, because at the end of the day, most of these organizations are not necessarily spending their own money as individuals. They're spending the money of the business. So therefore, your capacity to manage risk is really, really important, and setting the right price point for your solution. If we don't have someone strong internally coaching us, guiding us on the customer side, we're going to struggle. I talk about win themes when I do sales coaching, and people are like, what does a win theme mean? For me, we often hear about USP, what's your unique selling point? But that's almost irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. If we do really good discovery or needs analysis, and then we connect that back to the things that we as an organization think we do pretty well, that's where your win themes come from. That's where your differentiation comes from. And in losing big customers, we often see that there's no real differentiation. There's no strong win themes. This is a consistent issue across the sales world, where we focus too much on our solution, what I call the show up and throw up. We don't really spend enough time talking to our customers about their problems, their needs, their issues, their desires, and that's a fundamental problem. Another reason sometimes big customers, they can default to the brand that's a little bit more recognized. That's not something which should be a major issue to overcome, but if you don't tick some of these other boxes, then it could be another chink in your armor. And then not being very good at using our resources. One of the big challenges we see across a lot of organizations is we spread ourselves too thin. We chase too many things, and as a result, our resources are spread too thin, and that starts to sort of come apart at the seams, and customers see that. So that's why we lose big customers. I thought I might quickly share why do we win some big customers, and then in a moment I'm going to talk about a couple of things that we've seen that have changed a little bit since the advent of COVID a couple of years ago. So why do we win? We see companies that go beyond marketing to thought leadership, where they're really kind of driving the conversation in their industry. They're being very proactive in sharing content out there. I was asked once what constitutes really good marketing, and for me, if it hurts a little bit to share it because it feels a little bit like your secret sauce or a little bit like your intellectual property, usually that's good content, because people are actually going to engage with it when you start to build a conversation. Big deals tend to also be longer sales cycles. And so what we have to do all the way through that is we have to validate our assumptions. We see many deals being lost because the information that was shared at the start of the sales cycle has changed significantly. The priorities of the organization have shifted, but sales professionals are kind of single point sensitive to the assumptions they heard at the start of they made at the start of the sales engagement. So we've got to be very, very careful there. Our capacity to manage risk and also cultural fit is one of the really, really big drivers of winning any customer, but particularly big customers. The biggest surprise to me in a decade of doing win and loss reviews is how often customers talk about the people on the vendor's side. They were great people. They really listened. We trusted them. We created a really good connection with them. And how often they talk about purpose versus how rarely they talk about product and price. Yes, product and price are important if you want to get from the long list to the short list, but the quality of your people and your purpose often gets you, that last mile to win the business in the end. Adding value is an expression that's almost lost all meaning in our industry now because it gets thrown around all the time. But it's really critical that we understand that if you can find a way to add a little bit of value at each step of the process, it puts you in a very, very strong position, because you create this kind of reciprocal response in the customer who wants to reciprocate a little bit of value back to you. And that just kind of adds up over time, over the life of the sales cycle. A really simple but profound insight for me in my own sales career was to stop just focusing on my customer, the person across the table from me, and to focus on my customer's customer. And we see this all the time as a trend now, where I have a very good understanding of the outcome that you're trying to deliver for someone else, whether that's internal stakeholders or external customers or partners. And I get very focused on helping you deliver the outcome to the third party rather than just selling you my kit or my widget. References, which have been obviously very important in our industry forever and ever, are becoming actually a little bit less important. And what we're seeing is peer feedback is becoming more important. So there's a couple of things that we really need to take into account in relation to that. So I talked about weak win themes when we lose big customers. Really strong win themes that run right the way through your engagement tend to be a critical point of differentiation in big customer wins. Answering the so what question. What do I mean by that? It's really simple. We have a tendency in our industry to sort of put forward information in isolation without actually sharing the context for the customer as to why they should care about that. Because quite often we've spoken about our product so many times, we've pitched so many times, we've done our show up and throw up so many times that we can't hear it with a fresh set of eyes or ears. So I would really encourage anyone in sales who's listening to this to start thinking about, am I answering the so what question? Am I giving context when I give information? And the last one is it might seem like an easy one, but in many respects, it's the hardest of all because it kind of captures all of these different things. Is becoming easier to do business with, being seen as easy to buy from is becoming increasingly important if you want to win customers big and small. Okay, let me just pivot now for a moment and talk about a couple of things that have changed, a couple of kind of COVID-specific strategies that we've seen emerging in the last 18 months. And, Andrew, I suspect you might have seen some of these in your organization as well. Risk has really pushed up the food chain because a lot of organizations are struggling with all of the change and all of the uncertainty happening inside their company and outside in their target market. So therefore, your capacity to understand, manage, and mitigate risk has really jumped up the food chain in terms of the decision criteria. So that's a really, really important thing to focus on at the moment. As I alluded to earlier on, the quality of our people and our purpose and what we stand for and how we engage in a cultural fit perspective have always been important, but I think at the moment they're becoming even more important. We're getting that really strong rapport and connection with the customers we serve. So that's a very important one. Make the excuse the reason. What do I mean by that? I mean that at the moment we're hearing from a lot of customers why now is not a good time, why now is not the right time, why it doesn't make sense for us to move forward because of X, Y, Z. Because, as I said, there's so much change and uncertainty. How do we pivot that and make the excuse the reason? So help me understand what happens if you don't do something. Do you have a legacy platform? Are you going to fall behind from a competitive perspective? Will your customers give you a little bit of leeway to do something different now, but maybe when things ramp back up, you've lost that window of opportunity. So that's a good conversation as a sales executive or a sales leader to have. There's a bunch of fear and uncertainty out there, and so really important that as a business, we help our customers to kind of diffuse, understand, mitigate some of that fear as well as the risk. Because risk tends to be at an organizational level, fear often tends to be at a personal level. We're really strongly encouraging companies at the moment to be very, very clear in terms of their pricing strategy, because we're seeing customers push back quite hard if the pricing strategy is too opaque or narrow or not really serving them very well. A lot more focus on the business case. Business case has always been important. Are you getting return on investment over what period of time? How is the payback, et cetera? But we're seeing a renewed focus on that. And also people's threshold for buying stuff is dropping as well. So therefore, the focus on the business case tends to be, pretty tricky. As I said earlier in relation to big deals, so too in relation to what's changing since COVID, just making yourselves really easy to buy from and really easy to engage with and kind of aiming for trusted advisor status. So that was just a couple of kind of condensed conversations around a decade's worth of win-loss insights, which I hope was happy. Oh, and the last one, of course, is around telling better stories, which is just a fundamentally strong way to kind of create a connection with customers, but also get them to retain the information that we want to share with them. So just a couple of quick things in terms of what could you do? What are some actions you could take based on those insights from a moment ago? So I talked about answering the so what question and the importance of context. So if I think about a lot of the sales organizations that I talk to, they'll often say things like, look, we've got lots of customers. Look at all their logos behind me. Aren't we great? So what? You've got to be really, really careful with that. Talk about the customers you have, but maybe highlight a couple of specific customers due to the similarity or due to the industry they come from. Because what that speaks to is that actually speaks to the fact that you've thought about it, you've personalized it, you've tailored it, you've actually done something rather than you've just thrown up your corporate deck. The other quick tip would be just be careful at throwing up a lot of logos, because what happens is people know people at those organizations, so they immediately start picking up the phone and reference checking you before you've ever had the chance to warm up those references. So just be really careful. My advice would be that's a slide, if you're going to present it, that should change for each presentation you do. Telling people you've got a couple of thousand staff focused on innovation, they don't care because they don't know why they should care. So we need to contextualize that for them. We're really proud of the innovation awards we've received because we've won them with our customers. And maybe if we work with you into the future, we could win an award. Now what you've done is instead of giving them information in isolation. You've given them context and made it kind of relevant to them. And just a final example, we're all over the world. We've got 1 million locations. Who cares? I don't know why that's relevant to me. But if they're a global organization, that gives them peace of mind that they're going to get a proper coverage model of wherever they are in the world. So this is kind of a simple but profoundly impactful way to think about how do we give a little bit of context. So that's and I'm just going to pause for a second. All of this, everything that I'm telling you, is yours. It's available to you. If you've earned the right to some feedback through your cost of sale and the efforts of your sales team, you need to be capturing this. You need to be collecting this, because you can see just in this very, very quick kind of conversation how much value is sitting on boardroom tables across your customers that you haven't captured because either you didn't know it was there or you didn't have a mechanism to do it. So that's what I'd encourage you to think about. One of the things that we see happening a lot is sales cycles and buying cycles getting out of whack. So sales organizations doing a whole lot of things over here, customers doing different things over here, but those two things not lining up. This is one of the single biggest reasons that sales slow down. And one of the biggest frustrations that many B2B organizations have is that deals go quiet, deals slow down. We can't progress them. We get these zombie deals in our forecast that sort of never die, but they never quite, come to fruition. The single best strategy I could suggest is just creating a much tighter alignment between your sales cycle and your buying cycle. And that's a really great mechanism to sort of move that forward. So document your sales process. Don't force the customer to speed up. Actually kind of meet them where they're at and then move forward together. And be very, very clear on what that process looks like to move ahead. So these are just some of the really quick strategies. And the last one I wanted to share with you today, and this speaks to something I touched on a moment ago, was this concept of people and purpose, not product and price. This was a huge surprise to me, I suppose, as I started to embark on win-loss reviews a decade ago. How often customers kept saying, talking about the people and talking about the individuals and the interactions as distinct from talking about the product and price. And the realization eventually dawned on me that product and price are incredibly important up to a point. But at that point, they get put to one side because you've ticked the product box and you've ticked the price box, and now we want to explore your people and your purpose. So my advice here would be something that might seem a little bit strange is to sell to people's hearts as well as their heads. Don't just sell on feature function, but sell on engagement, rapport, connection, quality of your people. Okay, just to wrap up, then I'll hand back to Andrew. A couple of things you can have a think about, or a couple of things you can change, today, immediately. Sales execution, first and foremost. Just trying to avoid some of those kind of mistakes that I shared with you. Make sure everything you put out the door is professional, your RFPs, that you have really good discovery, that your team know the SLAs, you've got the right team in the park. It might seem like simple stuff, like 1%, but you're not usually losing by 50% in our experience, and you're not winning by 50%. It's lots and lots of increments of 1% and 2% at all the different stages of the engagement. Just fight the bland, fight the vanilla, the boring, because customers are putting a lot of effort into their tender documents, into their proposal requests, and they will read yours from cover to cover. It's a huge opportunity to differentiate yourself. It's a huge opportunity to step out from the pack. But if we think, well, I'm not going to personalize it because that takes too much of my time. Okay, but just assume you're going to get a similar level of response from the customer. Always answer the so what question. We have to get out of this muscle memory of just repeating, regurgitating information. We've got to give it context for the customers we work with. Really, really, really get focused on your customer's buying cycle first, not just your sales cycle. I can't emphasize it enough. It's the people that you have on your team who are the personification of your product, of your service, of your brand, of your organization, that are actually the key point of differentiation. So really make sure that not only you recruit great people, but also you support them and enable them in a way that they can really stand out from the pack. And then last but not least, this concept of just being easy to do business with, which is super simple to say and really, really hard to execute on, but it's a good thing to aspire to. And that's just a little bit about Trinity. I think, Andrew kind of alluded to it at the start. So we do a bunch of win-loss stuff, but also sales training and sales transformation, as I mentioned as well, and work with, lots of great companies around the world and some great partners in media as well. And that's it, folks. That's all I had for you. So a really kind of quick run through of a decade of win and loss reviews. I hope that resonates. I hope there's a couple of nuggets in there which are which are interesting or impactful and maybe can move you forward in your sales engagements into the future. So thank you.